I don't know how many times I have to tell you this, Poper, but it's not the season. It hasn't been the season. It's not going to be the season. So until it's the season again, stop sending me text messages at ridiculous hours of the day.
I am a night owl. I'm up late. I decided to text you. I was doing some research for this OHL Stories podcast. And I thought I'm going to message Farwell because I know he probably puts his phone down at 9:30, has a warm glass of milk and shuts it down.
You can make fun of my advancing years all you want. It's fair. I accept it from young punks like you. But yes, the reality is, warm milk aside, I lead a rather normal life. Okay. There's a get up time and go to work like a normal human. There's a go to bed time so you can be fresh for work the next day. And when I get up in the morning and I see a text from Chris Pope at about 12:24 a.m. and it's some lunatic like ranting about being denied the opportunity this year to see Francesco Pinelli, I'm like, okay, I get your point. On the scale of COVID casualties, it's down the list, but more than that, why is this coming in at 12:24? Why is Pope concerned about this right now that he's got to text me about it?
I do a lot of my responding to the messages I don't get to during the day at about 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning. I'm at like my peak. I'm like, okay, what did I miss today? Because I am a very bad texter. I will get a text. I'll be on the road because I often drive for work or whatnot. And yes, I'm still out on the road working. And I'll get it and I'll be like, oh, okay, not urgent. I'll get back to them. And then the day gets by you. And then, you come home, you have dinner, you sit down, you're talking to your significant other, you're taking the dog for a walk. And then eventually I'm like, I should probably get back to a couple text messages. And at that point, I had seen that Francesco Pinelli had like 4 points at the under 18s. And I was just like, this sucks that we're not seeing the actual technical rookie season of Shane Wright this year would have been great. We got to see a bit of Connor Bedard out west, but I wanted to see Pinelli. He's going to be the first Rangers first rounder into the NHL since Radek Faksa. And here we are having to watch him for 7 games at the under 18s and a couple highlight clips from overseas because of some stupid virus. And I'm done with this virus thing and I'm getting to that point, and that was maybe the tipping point.
At least I know that the vast majority of the messages I send you fall into your not important or non-urgent category.
Non-urgent,
because
yeah.
The number of times that I don't get a response, I'm like, where is this? Like, I know he's got a phone. He's on it a lot, but clearly my messages just don't get through the filter of important stuff to you.
No, they are important, but it's like, hey, we have this guest lined up, this guy's confirmed for Monday. It's like, okay, I'll send Farwell a message when I get home. And then it's like, oh shoot, I didn't get back to that. Listen, if there are any of my friends and family that listen to this podcast, I don't know if there are, I kid, some do, but they're going to be laughing at this because they know that I am notoriously awful at returning texts. And I apologize for that. It's something I need to get better at. Maybe I could set it up for a post-COVID goal of mine.
You should maybe find a way. There's got to be a way to schedule responses or something like that and just have like a 6 or 12, let's say, generic responses that you could do to any particular, like it would make sense no matter what the text to you was. And then at 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning, those auto responses could just start going out to people. Sounds great. Catch you later, pal, or something.
Ha ha ha. Thank you. LOL. Great.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, why I do that. I say I'm driving and I could respond when I get that text real quick using my Apple CarPlay, but I'm often listening to another podcast or I'm in the middle of jamming out. And I'm like, I'll get to it later. But that's my job. I get to drive around and have some spare time. You apparently during this month of May, we didn't talk about it last time. I'm surprised you even have time to do this podcast, given your Farwell for Hire campaign that takes place every month of May, and here we are back into it again. How you doing? You're 3 days in. At the time of this recording.
You have no idea how much anxiety this causes for me. Like I sometimes ask myself why I do it to myself every year. And then of course I realize that I do it for very personal and important reasons because 2 of my sisters passed away from cystic fibrosis. The month of May is Cystic Fibrosis Awareness Month. And I had this idea, and for some reason it caught on with people back in May of 2014 to hire myself out for any and all odd jobs in exchange for a donation to cystic fibrosis. Instead of just asking people, hey, will you make a donation? Will you sponsor me for the big walk at the end of the month? let's try it this way. And it really caught fire, which I'm very grateful for. And I make no bones about the fact that the job that we do on a day-to-day basis is not that difficult. There's no heavy lifting, there's no sweating. But the problem is I go from 11 months of that to a month of a whole lot of that. And it's from 0 to 60, right? So it makes me anxious at this time. My calendar is already filling up with jobs to be done. In fact, as soon as we finish recording here, I'm off to work, even though it's raining outside right now. And that's fine. It's all for the right reasons, but it does give me anxiety. I will just quickly say this shamelessly. If you'd like to help out and you don't want to make me work, you want to take pity on my old bones, that's great. You can go to farwellforhire.com, farwell, the number 4 hire.com, find out all about the campaign. You make a donation right there. Or maybe you just want to do what you do at every single OHL game that you attend, and you haven't been able to do this. Buy a 50-50 ticket. That's right. If you're listening in Ottawa right now, you're listening in Windsor, you're listening in Owen Sound, Sudbury, North Bay, anywhere in Ontario, buy a 50-50 ticket. The jackpot is already north of $11,000, and you're going to be supporting cystic fibrosis. Rangers5050.com. Enough shameless plugs.
If someone were to make a donation, could they postpone the job that needs to be done? Like if I have a job come, say, July 5th, could I make a donation now to provide your services for July 5th?
I reserve the right for future jobs to determine what that job is and how much the donation is before I'm committing to something in July. Because I'll tell you, 31 days in May is pretty intense.
Do you have a truck?
I know what you're getting at. Everybody needs a truck friend. Whatever. You're from Palmerston. You know everybody with a truck.
No, I'm honestly curious as to what's going to happen if the Kitchener Rangers ever make it to an OHL final again, because it was just 3 years ago on the eve of May, we were up in Sault Ste. Marie, double overtime, game 7 of the Western Conference final. And you're like, Popey, I don't know what's going to happen here. Like we fly home tonight one way or another. My campaign starts tomorrow or like 2 days from now. What am I going to do if we're then having to go to the Eastern Conference and play an OHL championship? And I'm having 31 or 30 days, have September, April, 30 days of 31. Okay, thank you. 31 days of Farwell for Hire campaign, how that is going to happen. So I don't know how you do it on a normal year, but I'm hoping that the Kitchener Rangers do get back to an OHL final and we get to see you really juggle all those balls.
It's funny because that year of that memorable 7-game Western Conference final that finished in the Sioux on April the 30th of 2018 gave me reason to think and kind of reevaluate this, because at some point it is going to happen. And that night, it was so funny that night. So look, we knew the Rangers had a pretty good team that year, and they loaded up at the deadline, Mike McKenzie's first year as general manager, and so on and so forth. But believe it or not, unlike the first year when I started this fundraising campaign, I actually put some thought into it. I plan ahead. The first year I thought of this, I'm like, let's throw this out on Twitter and see what happens. And here we are. But that year was the first year I had planned an actual launch party. We were going to have people do a bar in downtown Kitchener, kick it off with a bang and make some money and blah, blah, blah. That party, like months of planning had already gone into it. And we were sitting there in the intermission of overtime, number 1, heading into double overtime. And it was about 10:30, something like that. I remember looking at the clock at one point, it was 10:45, because we got word, or maybe the game ended at 10:45. Either way, we got word that you're flying out before midnight or you're not flying out.
Yeah.
So then I'm like, if we're only going into double overtime, this game has not yet been settled. And I'm like, if this game doesn't finish in this overtime, we're done. If it goes to a third overtime, then we're never going to make our flight. And I'm going to have to text back home and say, stuck in the Sioux, enjoy the launch party.
Enjoy the launch party without me. I'll zoom in. Nowadays, that's what you would do. You would just zoom into the launch party. I have to give you credit though, because when this thing first started, the Farwell for Hire, because you've always raised money for cystic fibrosis, because you normally did the walk and so on and so forth. But when you started the whole Farwell for Hire thing, as you mentioned, you didn't really do much planning behind it. You were raking lawns, doing driveways, sticking your arm up a cow. Horse. Yes, that happened. Horse, whatever. You were really pounding the pavement, but you've gotten smarter, Mike. you've gotten smarter, not just because of this COVID. Now there's a 50-50. Now there's a donation. Now you're selling merch. You're working smarter, not harder. And I do have to give you credit because you're still hiring yourself out, but you're also providing the option of, if you want to give me a break, you can still find other ways to do it. So I wanted to give a quick stick tap because you are working smarter, not harder.
Well, let me piggyback on that, because you talk about merch here. To everyone in London, you're going to love this. If you go to farwellforhire.com/shop and look for the merch yourself, maybe you want to get a Farwell for Hire t-shirt of your own and do ungodly things to it. Like, have at it. Come on, take a piece if you want to. And you're also helping charity at the same time.
Okay. I'm going to bring it up. I wasn't sure if I was going to.
Okay.
Yeah. I think you should, for Farwell for Hire, maybe just throughout the OHL season, I think you should sell shirts with the Farwell for Hire logo on the front. But a few years back, you had a great rant, and on the back of the shirt, maybe you could put a hashtag "Suck it London."
No, you know what?
You should sell those because you would make a killing. And I would really like to see late in the season or anytime during the season, Ranger fans showing up to the odd with a Farwell for Hire shirt with that hashtag on the back.
You know what? That would do really well, I think, in 19 OHL markets. It's funny you bring that up, because just last week we were reminiscing about the late, great Don Cameron on this podcast, because we are just coming up on 3 years since his passing, and last week happened to be 3 years since the last game he called. And so I don't remember how Suck It London became a thing, but you're right. I was ranting about something, and I started using it an awful lot. Again, much like you and I have talked about on this podcast, it's sports. It's supposed to be fun. And we know that the City of London and the London Knights wear the heel label proudly. So whatever, I'm going to stick it to you from a little further east down the 401. Well, I got a call one day, Poper, on my daily talk show on 570 News. And it was from a gentleman that said, I really don't like when you use that kind of language. Don Cameron would never say such a thing, no matter what he thought about the London Knights or anything else. He says, I think you should reconsider your use of that kind of language. And I'm like, well, you play the Don Cameron card on me. The guy's not wrong. The caller was not wrong. So I dialed back the WWE-esque rhetoric a little bit, and I truly have not said until now, "Suck it, London," one time since that man called me on it.
Well, that is where I kind of bounced around whether I was going to bring it up or not, because I don't know if it's PG, and I know we do have some young OHL fans that listen. Anyway,
kids, be better than me, please. It's not hard.
I see where that fan was coming from. It was still great when it came out, and I think selling the merch would just be fair. Well, you'd break records. But I know you said enough of the selfless plugs. How much did you raise last year?
Oh my goodness gracious. Like $162,000. Crazy, right?
That's crazy. And I'm extremely proud of you. And I know your sisters would be too. So we try not to get too emotional. It's normally chirping here, but every month of May, I do get a little soft spot for you because everything you've went through and everything you do for this community and for this CF cause, finding a cure or control for cystic fibrosis. So I don't know when we're going to be able to record hour or 2 hour long podcasts during this month, but we will find ways to get these podcasts out to our listeners and to you. In good luck this month, and if I can help in any way, please let me know, other than the monetary donation I will be making. I know, brother, and I appreciate it. You've been a great support over all these years, and you're no slouch either. You're always out there busting your ass. You're at this barbecue. You're loaning your connections to other things that you actually helped sponsor one of our prizes in our 50-50 draw. We've got a bunch of early bird and consolation prizes if you don't win the big jackpot. So don't sell yourself short, but thanks for the support on my efforts too. I only help out when there's beer involved. Nothing wrong with that. Kidding. Yeah, but we all have our reasons. All have our reasons. Come on. I got a lot of cases that are close to heart. But anyway, enjoy the month of May. And this has already been almost a 2 hour long podcast with our guest that we recorded the interview with and the intro. And I know you probably have a 3 o'clock. So you want to wrap it up? Sure. Let's, and real quick, because you're talking about these podcasts that are coming out next week, is our first ever listener requested guest. We got an email to farwellandpope@gmail.com, says, hey, I'd love to hear from this guy. You ask,
we respond. So that's coming up next week. And please send us an email at any time, farwellandpope@gmail.com. Let us know what you like, what you don't like, who you want to hear on the podcast. And when you do listen to the podcast, wherever it is you're doing that, leave us a rating. Would you mind? Give us a comment, a review of some kind. We would love to hear that from you too. And of course, the more you do that, the more this kind of spins out into those old algorithms and stuff.
Of course, it's also on YouTube if you want to watch it there. If you are watching it on YouTube, you can listen to it on your mobile, Spotify, or Apple iTunes. Follow us on Twitter at @farwell_OHL and @_Chris Pope.
So you always do such a great job of teeing up these guests. You found your way through your connections, Poper, to get us to this scout who has been around the game for more decades than even maybe not more than I've been alive, but he's getting up there. He's getting close, not to give away his age, but he has seen an awful lot. He was right there when the New York Rangers came so close to their Stanley Cup. Didn't get there, was part of a dismissal along with Craig Patrick at that time. Well, he left when Craig Patrick got dismissed, but lots of stories, lots of connections to the NHL. In some way, somehow, you unearthed this guest this week, Poper.
Quick story, because I know you do have to go. 2 years ago, Kansas City Chiefs win the Super Bowl. I'm at my buddy's place watching the game. A couple Molson Canadians, and I get sitting on a couch with my buddy's Uncle Shannon Curry. My buddy goes, Poper, Shannon used to scout for the Rangers. Next thing I know, through the whole halftime and third quarter until about 2 minutes left in the fourth, when Patrick Mahomes is orchestrating the giant comeback that he did, Shannon's still telling me stories about his time around the OHL and this player, and he drafted this. This is what I said to this guy. And my head's just going in circles listening to this guy. So I'm like, Shannon, we need to get you on the podcast. He says, nope, I'm not coming on the podcast. But he did say, I got a guy for you. And this guy has seen everything there is to see in hockey. You mentioned it, a long time National Hockey League scout for the Rangers, the Panthers. I know I'm missing a couple other teams in there. I think Arizona. Heck, I think he was around when the Rangers sold the Kitchener Rangers to Eugene George.
You're right about that.
To give you a timeline of how long Paul Henry has been around this game. Not only that, almost 2 decades as a psychologist for 2 maximum security prisons in Ontario, both Kingston and Millhaven. This guy has seen everything in hockey and has seen everything maybe that you don't want to see behind bars in talking to some of these hardened criminals. Ladies and gentlemen, Paul Henry. And remember, farwellforhire.com.
There are a number of OHLers that stand out as some of your best players of all time, Paul. But I wanted to start with just a little bit about you, because did I hear correctly that you spent last summer running around the entirety of Prince Edward Island? Did that happen?
Oh, that was 1999.
Thank goodness it wasn't just last summer. You had me
worried there. It was on the rails to trails in 1999. We had training camp in 96 with the Florida Panthers, and I found the rail to trail, and I said, someday I'm going to run this whole province, and I did 132 miles on the rails to trails there. Some great stories from that one, I'll tell you. Some really, really funny, interesting stuff. But my favorite has to be the one about Forbes Kennedy. I ended up in the Chason family homestead in Tignish, PEI, and I was visiting with the family there because I ran it in honor of Steve to raise money for the family. You know, they had a 3, 5, and 7-year-old when he passed, and I really liked him as a player. He was a Memorial Cup MVP in 1986 with Guelph, and I just, I wanted to draft him for the Rangers, but we didn't have that fortune. And anyway, I am visiting with the Jasons, and they said, "Do you ever run into Forbes Kennedy?" I said, No. I see him at the games in Charlottetown." He said, "Well, if you see him, next time you see him, please tell him that his shoes are still here in the closet for when the Tignish team lost out in the Tier 2 playoffs. Forbes had forgotten his shoes and left them there, and they're still there in mint condition." And I did a podcast 2 weeks ago with the St. Mike's 60-61 Memorial Cup team and the junior B team that won the provincial that same year. And Forbesy ended up on that podcast. It was 3.5 hours. And I told him to go pick up his shoes 21 years after I was asked to do it.
What was his response?
Oh, he laughed, and his response was that, oh yeah. He says that's when I hung out with Stompin' Tom in Skinner's Pond, just a few miles from Tignish, and he went on and gave me a history lesson on that area, But that was the one I remember the most, was that his buddy Stompin' Tom Connors, was from, just very close to Tignish,
As tough as that run was, it sounds like it was a good time you had.
Well, it was one of the special times in my life. Yeah. Very, very special time. Yeah.
That 60-61 Memorial Cup team from St. Mike's that you just dropped the mention of a moment ago. Now, this, of course, is prior to the formation of the Ontario Hockey League back in the OHA days, but still, that team was special for a variety of reasons, not the least of which, Paul, is because a lot of the players were basically homegrown talent. They could probably walk to the rink every day.
Well, I know that I grew up in an area where 5 players on that team were within the radius of three miles of each other. There were the 3 Draper brothers. There was Terry O'Malley, who was, and Les Kozak. And Paul Jackson, actually. Mike Draper was not on that team. He was too old. But the Draper twins, and you all know probably Dave Draper, who's the only guy to win a Memorial Cup as a player, coach, and manager. And he won 2 World Junior gold medals with the junior team back in '88. And he won the Stanley Cup with Colorado Avalanche, in '96. So pretty good resume for that area. That we all grew up in Eglinton Park, and Roger Nielsen was our mentor and coach in baseball and hockey,
I was going to bring that up. Playing baseball and hockey under Roger Nielsen as a kid. What was it like?
He was a great, great man, and he was a better baseball coach than hockey coach. It was just fun, fun, because we used to fight over the right to get up at 4 a.m. and deliver 700 Globe and Mails, and all the kids idolized him to the point that we used to fight for that right to, he started you off as a roller and a thrower, and then if you did a good job, you became a collector. And the best story of all time is my best friend, a guy named Skip Stanowski, whose father won the Memorial Cup in 1938. He died at 96, the second oldest to Kitchener's Milt Schmidt, second oldest NHLer, won 4 Stanley Cups with the Leafs. But he was a collector on the 23rd. He went up to this house, and it was the Don Cherry of his day. And the guy said, like, Roger made us dress up, and he, shirt and tie, and he was the guy was just fascinated with Stanowski, who ended up becoming the 1967 MVP in the NCAAs with Cornell, with Trident. Anyway, he, the guy said, "Look at my son over there." He says, "I can't get him out of the house. All he does is sit there and play the guitar all day long. He's never going to amount to nothing." Who do you think that guy was?
I don't know.
Neil Young.
I was trying to think if it was a hockey player or
Neil Young. He's never going to amount to nothing. Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I remember asking him to do a concert for Timo Solani in Finland. He wanted $750,000. He's never going to amount to nothing.
How did you, I just got to follow that up. Sorry, Farwell. How did you plan a concert for Timo Solani in Finland? Well,
no, he wanted to bring Neil Young to a concert in Finland.
Gotcha.
Him and Alpo Suonen. Alpo was a coach of Winnipeg. I think the second European after Ivan Olenka to coach in the NHL. But he wanted Neil badly, but not that badly.
Not that bad.
Yeah, not $750,000 badly.
No, but he's never going to amount to nothing.
Right.
We told that story when 1,200 of us had a great night for Roger Nielsen and at the Westin in Toronto. Harper Castle. We had when he was sick with his illness.
You mentioned Selanne's name, Paul, and he's one of the guys that you identify as among the best you ever saw. What made Teemu Selanne so special?
He just radiated excellence. I remember the first time I saw him play in Lappeenranta, Finland, which is on the Russian border, 15 miles from Russian border, and he got 3 goals and 3 assists, and they won 10-4, and I remember telling him after that night that he was going to be the Rookie of the Year. And, he was electrifying, electrifying. Just as good a person as he was a player. I mean, he's just so charismatic and it all comes from the mother who, for me, she looked after the welfare department in a little town, a city called Espoo. ESPOO, and it's the second largest city in Finland, and she was in charge of welfare department. So she looked after, needy people, and she instilled that kind of a, value system in her son, who had a twin brother, by the way, who was a goalie, Yeah.
Farwell's mentioned that list of the best players you've ever seen a couple times now. For people who didn't hear the list, who is at the top of that list for you?
I can't even remember. Was it Keon?
you had in no particular order, Bobby Orr, Dave Keon, Teemu Selanne, Eric Lindros, and Paul Kariya. Yeah.
I'll take any one of those 5 guys. Number one.
A guy like Paul Kariya. Excuse me. He was a little ahead of his time, I guess, being a smaller stature player in a big man's game back in those days. What made him so special?
Well, the commitment was, and the focus was 100%, Yeah, I mean, I remember the first game I saw him play, which was his first college game in Orono, Maine. And I remember he got 2 goals and 2 assists, and they demolished Providence College 9-2. And I remember the Ferrero twins stole 1-1 off him, and meeting with him the next day, and it was like water off a duck's back. He couldn't care less, And I remember, a few months after that, being in Milwaukee when he was, playing for the national title, and he scored over 100 points, and he, won the Hobie Baker, and and he won the national championship all the same year. I mean, he just so focused, just so focused, and it's really interesting because that same, that 60-61 team was Father Bauer's team, and the same Father Bauer had his father, TK Kariya, who was a national rugger team player, and he hung out with all those guys that were at St. Mark's in UBC, on the national team, and I mean, Kariya's father's love for hockey came from hanging around with O'Malley and McKenzie, all those guys that were at that he brought out west to, for the Grenoble and Olympics in '68, So that's where the father's passion for hockey came from, just hanging around with the Father Bauer disciples.
So Kariya, Selanne, and then a couple of those OHLers on that list of 5 we just went over, Bobby Orr and Eric Lindros, both former Oshawa Generals. But did you ever, I mean, Eric Lindros dominated the game. Had it not been for injuries, who would have known what the ultimate bar would have been for him? But in junior, he was a man amongst boys.
Yeah, totally. I was working for the national team from 86-94, and I had him in a game as a 15-year-old with the national team in Fredericton, New Brunswick, against the Russians. He scored in his first shot off the face-off, top shelf, at 15. And it was so much fun watching him play with St. Mike's Junior Bees that year. And I always used to run into John McCauley's, and his son Wes was on the same team. Eric's a 73 and Wes is a 72. And John used to, Eric idolized John because John used to tell him he was the second best player on the team after Wes, But the 88 is because John was a top lacrosse player in the country, and I think his number was 8. So and somewhere it must have been taken. That's why it became 88.
You mentioned you were part of that the national team for our country, and I wanted to ask about Lillehammer particularly. What do you remember from that trip?
Well, it's so far ahead of the rest of anything I did in hockey all my life. It was, I remember it was August the 8th in 92 when I was offered the job in a payphone in Kitchener. I had been watching, something at the auditorium in August. I guess it was, I think it might have been under 18 team. I think it might have been, anyway, I was bent and driven on making every Canadian proud of the team, and it certainly ended up that way when we lost in a shootout to Forsberg and the Swedes,
How much does that still sit with you all these years later, the fact that it ended the way that it did?
Well, I always used to give it to Forsberg every time I saw him, and I saw him 2 years ago, and in Orange Speak at the World Under 18, which is the same tournament that's going on in Plano, Texas, and I mean, he always told me to get over it. And I remember the night he got inducted into the Hall of Fame, I went to Toronto for the induction ceremonies and told him I still wasn't over it. So, but it's just not the way to settle a gold medal game in my estimation.
What were you doing during that shootout?
Just hoping we won.
I didn't know if you'd be pacing back and forth or if you could watch it.
I've never been at a game. I've never been at a game for the last 8 minutes of that game when Derek Mayer scored for us to go up 2-1. And I've never seen a team come after another team harder than the Swedes in the last 8 minutes of the game. And we took a good penalty. Brad Warenka, who went on to play in Edmonton, and there was no issue about the penalty, and they tied it up. And then the shootout was Forsberg against Korea. And when you look back upon it, I mean, Forsberg had an inch better career than Korea. Everything you saw in that gold medal game, it's almost like it was the reality of the next many years in the NHL. Our first line was Korea, Nedved, and Kontos, and the next line was Greg Johnson, who became the captain of Nashville for 6 years, Savage, and Dwayne Norris, and that's Josh, his son now, playing for Ottawa. We had a really, really, really good team of future NHLers. We had Chris Therien, who played many years in the NHL, and Adrian Aucoin, who at one point was in the top 8 defensemen in the league. He got 23 goals one year for Vancouver. He became the highest scoring defenseman goal-wise in their history. So it was a great developmental opportunity, and it was exactly what Father Bauer envisioned. I went to St. Mike's High School in Toronto, and that was tattooed on my rear end pretty heavily. The importance of education and hockey at the same time. And, that was the last sort of Olympics of that nature.
Can you take us through the construction of the team, Paul, and what goes into getting that group together that would represent Canada at Lillehammer? I think Dave King would have been part of the program back then as well.
No, Dave became the coach of Calgary Flames in '92, and I had worked with Dave from '86 to '92 as the director of scouting. So when he left, I recommended Dave Draper, Dave Chambers, and Bob Murdoch, and they couldn't have a contractual agreement. And then they asked me to do it, and I got a leave of absence as a psychologist at a mental health center in Penetanguishene type of thing. So that's how that came about. And I mean, there was no recruiting career. He from the age of 15 on had a relationship with Hockey Canada when he was playing in Penticton, getting about 148 points a year as a 15-year-old. Dave King and he established a relationship, and he wasn't playing in the NHL until he had the Olympic experience. So there was no recruiting, basically the first guy I signed was a guy named Hank Lammons, who was a world champion sailor out of Brockville, who I'd watched back in '85 with Brockville Braves, and then he went on to St. Lawrence. And he was our captain. And I remember, looking after him for after the Olympics, and Ottawa Senators stole him from us, and he never had the chance to be a summer and winter Olympian, which he wanted to be. And the second guy I signed was Adrian O'Coin, and it took 7 visits to his house, from Penetang to Orleans, and the 7th visit he said yes, and that was, and then one after one we just were able to. We established very, very good relationship with like Pierre Pagé, gave us Dwayne Norris and Todd Warner, who had been picked 4th overall, and Todd was a really special guy, as was Dwayne, and we had Brad Schlegel from Kitchener on D, and Todd Alushko from Guelph. They were. I mean, Todd Alushko's hit on Kenny Johnson, the first round pick of the Leafs, was monumental. I mean, if it's on YouTube, just have a look at it. I mean, he was the hit of the clean hit. Just the hit of the tournament type of thing. So, but we were able to get Corey Hirsch from the Rangers. Neil Smith was outstanding with us, giving us Corey Hirsch, Johnny Voix, who's another Maine player, MA, like University of Maine. But Corey Hirsch at that time was voted by the Hockey News as the number 1 player outside of the NHL. And Manny Legacy signed him in '93 in Sault Ste. Marie at the Memorial Cup, and I mean he went on to win the Stanley Cup with Detroit. He was the backup to Corey Hirsch, but he had a much longer and prolific NHL career. But that's we had a really, really good schedule, tough schedule, and we just drove towards getting, ready for the Olympics.
You mentioned Sault Ste. Marie, and you're talking goaltenders. My brain automatically goes to John Van Beesbrook.
Yeah.
I read a story somehow he was responsible for putting some money in your pocket.
Yeah, he got me a $30,000, $35,000, and $40,000 raise. So I call my boat the John Van Bees boat. He went public with my helping him as a sports psychologist. So that it's something I can't talk about, but he did. So that's that became a $40,000 raise, him talking about it. So I'm indebted to him for life.
The John Van Bees boat. That is outstanding.
Yeah. And I almost got him on it when the Flyers had training camp in Peterborough, which is near our cottage in Norland, which it's an hour away. And he never saw the John Van Bees boat, but our family had a lot of fun on that boat.
I'm really interested in that side of your story, Paul. How a guy goes from working in the correctional system in Canada at various prisons to becoming, among other things, a sports or team psychologist. How did that all come to pass?
Well, it happened with Wayne Thomas, who is a long-standing friend of mine. When I was working at Kingston Pen, I was unmarried and living with Wayne's best friend, a guy named Ian MacArthur, who was at Teachers College in Kingston. And I met Wayne through Ian, and we'd become good friends and friends with all those Leaf guys. And Wayne ended up in New York Rangers in '77, and he ended up being an assistant coach to the New York Rangers, to Herbie Brooks, and there was a pick that was really struggling with 3 goals and 3 assists in 25 games, and Wayne recommended that I speak to the guy, and I had a 3.5-hour meeting with the guy, and he got 4 goals the next game and 2 the game afterwards, and that's how my career in hockey started, and I've been in it since, So that's how it was a fluke. I mean, I never had any vision to be in hockey. I mean, I loved hockey since, being a 6-year-old type of thing, but I didn't, I wasn't a guy looking to get into it, but that's how it started. And then the Rangers asked me to be the team psychologist and also to be the Ontario scout. And they paid me 50% psychology, 50% scouting. So, and it, so I worked for them from 82 to 86, and I quit the day they fired Craig Patrick, who got backstabbed and lost his job after we went to the semifinals, and then again we lost to Patrick Waugh. And it was Van Beesbroek versus Waugh, and Patrick won the Stanley Cup that year by himself almost, and then 10 years later it's the same 2 guys facing each other in the finals. I thought the law of average would pan out, but no, Patrick was not to be knocked off the pedestal.
Patrick winning that cup, is that the most dominant performance you've seen
in the Stanley Cup?
Yeah, or just in hockey, really?
Well, no, but it was pretty close. Pretty close. Yeah. It was. Here's a guy, I read his book, 700 pages, and here's a guy that had a 5.6 goals against average in junior hockey and never won anything all the way up, and then he won the Calder Cup, symbolic of the American League Championship, as a, guy that finished playing junior. And then the next year he wins the Stanley Cup, pretty special career. But 5.6 goals against average, so, he just, nothing, he's just a winner,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You talked about that time with the New York Rangers, 50% psychology, 50% scouting. When you're scouting, especially at that level, Paul, do you remember, how much would you fight for a certain player, a guy that you've scouted, you've been watching, and you say, this is the guy we have to have on our team?
Yeah. Well, probably the best fight I ever had with that was Adam Graves versus Brian Leach. That was a 2-week fight, and I had Adam fourth on my list, and I'd seen him 18 times, and then I had Brian 7th on my list, and I'd only seen him 3 times. So you're going to fight for the guy, you know, that is in your area. But anyway, the two American guys, Chuck Grillo and Ray Clearwater, they you know, they won the fight, and by some level of fate, the two of them were both on the '94 Stanley Cup team, you know. But Adam here, he goes 22nd, and Brian went 9th, you know. So that I mean, we had a great staff, you know. Like, you fight and then it's over, and you have a consensus, you know. So you work as a team, and teams win, you know.
Well, when I was playing, we had in Guelph, we had a sports psychologist, Doc Widmeyer. But back when you got started, I don't think it was a very common place. Did you get a lot of pushback when you first got into the league?
Well, I don't get any more pushback today than I got then. You know, I could care less about pushback. I'm going to do what I can do, and you know, I don't worry about what other people think. You know, but it's still hardly used. Everybody talks about it, but 90% of guys I see have never looked at how they feel. So, you know, I mean, it's still not a priority. You know, I haven't seen it anywhere being a priority. Nobody goes after the best sports psychologist like they do the best coach. You know, like a Mike Babcock capitalizing on a $48 million contract. Certainly, you know, you're in the background, and that's where you want to be. There's no issue anyway, you know. But it's just not. It's, you know, some players use it, other players, you know, diss it. But you know, I've never had any issue with the way it is. It's reality, you know. People don't like to open up, you know.
I've heard you talk, Paul, about former Kingston Canadian Tim Kerr as perhaps one of the most maybe mentally tough or mentally complete players.
Oh yeah, it was ridiculous. The summer before he ended up making Philly, like he was a man, a driven, determined man. Like I mean, he, you know, came out of Kingston. He was an undrafted 6'3", 220-pound tree trunk, you know, who still has the record for the most power play goals in the NHL in history. And, you know, he only played a few games that year after Kingston got knocked out of the playoffs in Maine Mariners. And you know, there was nothing stopping him. And when a guy puts that in his mind and does exactly what, you know, he says he's going to do, that was really, really something to look back upon, you know. The success he had, undrafted. I mean, that's, and at that time you could sign a player till November the 1st. So he had Detroit and Vancouver offering a lot more money. His family was really a tight, great family living, you know, in Tecumseh, just across the river from Detroit. But Philly, you know, with Keith Allen, who just called him every day and just made him feel so important, so special, and they had to stretch limo to pick him up when he went to Philly, you know, pre agreeing to sign with Philly. And it's just, you know, he made a great career decision, you know. And, you know, Ted Lindsay was offering a lot more money, and Jake Milford, if I remember correctly, in Vancouver, you know, they both offered more, but he went to Philly because of how classy the organization was, you know.
Yeah. Well, did I read that you bought Dave Keon's car?
I did. Yeah. You read absolutely correctly. From 45 Gray Abbey Trail in Scarborough. You know, his first year in the NHL, he drove an 8-year-old Monarch. You know, pretty classy, great car. But he won the Rookie of the Year, and with his bonus, he bought himself a brand new '61 Meteor. And his bonus was $1,500. and and he sold me it for $200.
Was it a good car, Paul?
It was a great car. Are you kidding me? And I left his house, and the first thing I hear is Pat Boone on the radio singing Moody River. After I picked it up.
I speaking of cars, and Chris and I talk about this all the time, because you log your share of miles during an OHL season, but Chris and I get to do it on the bus. Somebody else is doing the driving. As a scout, and especially when you're with the national programs, trying to find the players and meet the players, etc. A car, I'm thinking, basically becomes a second home to you.
Yeah, I live in my car, but I remember the years that I worked for the national team. Thrifty car rental. Got something in my throat here. Thrifty car rental gave me a new car every 28,000 kilometers. And to show you how much travel, I mean, I went through 7 cars. Yeah. And,
that's $200K in a year.
Well, whatever. I know that I buy from Rob Stein, and he has a battery of car dealerships, and basically he's always telling me nobody puts on more mileage, all the customers I have, than you. So COVID has slowed me down. It's I've got a Kia Sorento, and I think it had 135,000 miles in 2 years, and I think I've gone only 19,000 since, and that's 13 months and a half since the COVID type of thing.
COVID has obviously slowed down this OHL season. To a halt. What do you think the effects of not playing a full season are going to have, or what are the effects going to be for these players?
Well, I think there'll be, I think that where you get drafted, who you are, what you are, is going to be out the window. They're going to be going for whoever shows they're hungriest. And while I'm thinking of the Kitchener Rangers, I can't help but go to the great Andre Benoit. He played Junior C in our town the year he got drafted by Paul Paye, Serge's dad, by the Kitchener Rangers, and what a spectacular, wonderful kid that kid was for 5 years, and to see his banner up there every time I come into Kitchener is really, really, really special. Really special. I was at University of Guelph taking my MA when Larry Robinson played there, and to be up there with those guys, it's pretty big honor, and what a winner that kid was. That Memorial Cup team with Derek Roy and him second in scoring in that. So. Very, very, very special young man. Now married Rick Walmsley's daughter, so as he tells the story, he met her in the library.
You mean by library, he means hockey rink, I think.
No, library. Seriously.
Okay.
Yeah.
You talk about
Hey?
You talk about what a special player he was, and when I think about Andre Benoit, I think about survivor on many levels, just because he just kept popping back up in the game. He'd be in the NHL for a while, AHL, Europe, back to the NHL. The guy just never quit.
Yeah. Well, my memory, my first memory of him was he tried and wanted to be a member of the first ski on the first day up, and Korea was a member of it. Rick Tabarachi, first time skiing, and he couldn't get up on one, and dusk was falling, and he was beating the water up because he couldn't get up on one.
And I should point out that I mentioned not the library, but the hockey rink. Not in any way disparaging to Kelly, but
No,
she
no,
used to
no,
work
no.
with us on
Kelly?
broadcasts for Kelly did for Kitchener
Yeah,
Rangers
yeah,
games. Yeah,
yeah,
Kelly Walmsley.
yeah,
So
yeah.
I thought that
Great.
might have been a way that that Andre had a chance to at least get to know her better. But the library
No,
is even better.
he was with her long before I think she was on TV.
Okay.
If my memory serves me correctly, I had to give the approval to Rick before Rick was comfortable with Andre. Rick's favorite story was when he was playing for Brantford Alexanders, and they were Hamilton Steel Hawks. They were, and he always got a kick out of some leather lung. How are things, Walmsley, playing for the Ontario Fin Cups or something? It was really funny, like in other words that they moved every year, but what a career Rick had too, third round pick of Montreal, yeah, special guy.
When you're in those rinks, Paul, and obviously scouts, you guys see each other all the time. How much conversation is there about certain players between scouts on opposite teams?
Yeah, I think that you don't really talk about them because it's you don't want to show your hand, like yeah, I mean you're like I don't I don't talk to other scouts about players. I mean that's you if you do, you're not doing yourself any favors because all you're doing is giving them the information that your boss needs. Not that you have never done it or something, but no, I mean, it's not common. It's common that a lot of scouts think alike, but that's a different issue.
How much has the way you evaluate a player changed over the years?
I don't think it has changed. I think the fact is that players find you, not you finding players. Players find you. In other words, they jump out at you like a 3D type of thing. So, and then and everybody has something special about them. And lots of players have lots special about them, and you need as forwards, you need 6 offensive guys, and you need 6 guys that know how to play both ends of the rink. So I think it's a real knack, scouting, and not everybody can do it, and a lot of people don't want to pay the price, because it's a tough life, being away from your family, it's an exciting and interesting, life type of thing, but it's also, there's lots of risks and lots of rewards. I mean, some of the nights you have to go out in, but you do it because of commitment and love and passion, making teams better. As Korea used to tell me, players win.
I want to go back to this COVID thing just for a second. With the lack of a season, how detrimental to the mental health of some of these players do you think this failed season would be?
Well, that's something that you can't pinpoint at this point in time because it's still crippling, I mean, I think everybody thought that there would be a shortened season in the OHL, and then all of a sudden there's nothing. So OHL kids haven't had a chance to play for a year, unless they're the good ones who've had a chance to play at the national team level, But no, I think it's been a horrible year in terms of if that's your career path and you've missed a whole year, I mean, what about the European kids that you draft and they wait and they wait and they wait and they can't play, like I'm thinking of the Sioux, with Jaromir Pitlick, and Mary, not Marek, but Marek's son, Nick Malik, in Pitlick's case and Nick's case, they played in the World Junior, and have hardly played anything but that. Some players haven't had anything. Yeah.
You mentioned when talking about Andre Benoit a moment ago about his banner being up there in the rafters at the odd, right alongside a Larry Robinson, another player, and one of the most prolific scoring players that the Ontario Hockey League has ever seen is a fellow by the name of Peter Lee. His banner has been raised in Ottawa, and you had a chance to work with him in Berlin. What can you tell us about Peter, a guy that I know a lot of OHL fans would at least know the name?
Well, he's one of the smartest hockey men in Europe. He actually was Ralph Kruger's right-hand man with Team Switzerland all those years that Ralph was coaching Buffalo. But he's just made an unbelievable career winning in Berlin, in Germany, in the DEL. Very, very special, really, really great person, who now I think oversees all of Berlin's programs, but he's had a really, really, really great career in Europe, and just a sniper,
Yeah.
Good person.
You mentioned earlier about scouts, they see the same thing, and you said that's another story. Why do you think so many scouts see the same thing?
Well, no, I think that they talk too much, rather than, not talk, and one guy thinks one thing, and, then everybody thinks it. And I think it's really detrimental to the player that you're watching, because it's almost that they get fixed with that mentality. I remember Central Scouting sent us to see Mark Giordano. No, they sent us to see a guy named John Gleed, and all I could see was Mark Giordano. John Gleed subsequently got drafted in the 8th round, I think, by Montreal Canadiens at that time, and he went to Cornell. But the best player by 400 country miles was Giordano. And I actually remember seeing Ricky Nash and Stajan at that game. It was playoffs. And it was fascinating to see how good he was. And I remember Mike Futa calling me early July, do you think Mark Giordano can play for us? Like he was a late birthday, so he wasn't eligible for the draft. And he was going to Ferris State on a hockey scholarship. And I said, Mike, snap him up. And Mike did. And he played there, for 2 or 3 years. He played his overage year there. Dave Draper really, really liked him as well. We were working for Phoenix together, but we couldn't get him drafted. And then he didn't get drafted. And Tommy Webster, who was our minor league coach when I worked for the Rangers, called me and asked me what I thought, and I said, sign him, and he signed, Tommy Webster signed him, and basically he played in Lowell in the American League. And look, I'll never forget the night I was in Toronto watching Calgary play Toronto, and there's Giordano outplaying Bouwmeester, who everybody in the world was rushing to see play in Medicine Hat, who, got picked in the top 3 type of thing. And he was, and here's Giordano surpassing Bouwmeester at that point in time, it was, so you can never, ever count anybody or diss them, or, everybody, it's, there's, that's measuring heart, and Bouwmeester, I remember him play, in the under 17 as an underage in Newfoundland. And it was ridiculous. I couldn't believe how beautiful a skater he was and how good a player he was. So, but, he didn't, he I mean, he won the Stanley Cup there with St. Louis, but again, he was just so smooth, so good. But it's the same as the year 2013. Here you got Seth Jones rated 1, and you got McKinnon 2, and McKinnon was a man on a mission. I've never seen anybody dominate the Memorial Cup the way he did that year in Saskatoon. I mean, he was a man possessed to show Seth Jones who was better. So that's why they play the games.
You mentioned that U17 in Newfoundland where you saw Bouwmeester as an underager. Is that the same one, Paul? Joe Thornton?
No, Joe.
There was 95 with Joe.
Yeah, Joe, and that's very, very interesting what you're saying, because 95 is the only time there's ever been 2 under-17s in the same year. And that's the one that one of the major upsets of all time was a 3-1 win by Saskatchewan over Alberta, who featured, Chris Phillips, Jonathan Aiken, Josh Holden, Derek Morris, Darren Van Owen, all those guys were on that team. And there was a guy named Jarrett Smith who went first overall in the WHL. He was a 79 birthday. And he was, I remember a full page in the Edmonton Sun, the can't miss kid. Well, he was on the team, and I thought he looked like Frank Mahovlich in that tournament, to me, or Frank Mahovlich in waiting. Anyway, that tiny Saskatchewan, coached by Ross Mahoney, went on to win the Stanley Cup with Washington as the assistant general manager a couple of years ago. He was the coach of the team, and they had Patrick Marleau, who got 2 goals in the 3-1 win, and he was a 79, so he was an underager, And that was that Canada Winter Games in Grand Prairie in February of 95. And the same year in Moncton, at the end of the summer, just before school started, it was the under-17 that year in Moncton. And not Canada, but Ontario won 2-1 over Finland, and Joe Thornton scored the game-winning goal. Here's the 1 and 2 picks scoring, game-winning goal in 2 different and separate under-17s. And I was just saying to somebody, I've been watching Joe Thornton for 27 years. I saw him in Leamington at a Junior B All-Star game at 14, and so Patrick, I've been watching him play for 26 years. Anyway, pretty interesting.
Did you ever think watching those under-17s that Patrick would play the most games ever in the NHL?
No, not a chance. Are you kidding?
Yes.
No. You just saw how ridiculously special he was, and they had a good team besides Patrick. But they had Corey Sarich, who became an NHL defenseman for many years. They had a couple of really, really small standout players. Marty Standish, who went to play for Portland Winterhawks, and Jeff Ulmer, or Jason Ulmer, one of the two. There was 2 brothers. One was a 77, the other was a 78. They were from Wilcox. They had a guy named Trevor Wasiluk, who was a second-round pick of Carolina. They had, but they were so well prepared and so well coached, but Patrick was a superstar in waiting.
What is it that keeps the fire in your belly for this game all these years later, Paul?
I have no idea. All I know is my first childhood memory was kicking and screaming when my dad picked me up at 6 years old at St. Clair's rink, the school I went to, grade school at Dufferin and St. Clair in Toronto, my dad came to pick me up on his way home from work to go for dinner, and I didn't want to go, and I'm kicking, and that's my first childhood memory, and I still have the same passion today. I don't know why. have no clue.
You've obviously seen thousands and thousands of hockey games throughout your career. Is there one game or a specific moment that stands out to you?
I really, there's so many, it's ridiculous, but the one I talked about was Tavares played the best junior game I've ever seen a player play, and it was I think it was 6-5, and he got a power play goal, a shorthanded goal, and a regular strength goal, and he got an assist on another goal, and he had scored one in the first period, and then he was the last shooter, and he got the shootout game winner. That really defined what he is, who he is. That was special. And then I tell the story of the second best was Nikolai Ehlers, who they were losing 6-2 Halifax in Rouyn-Noranda, and he went to work, and I said that he got 3-3, but he corrected me last year and said he got 4-2. But those are two special games. But the one game by far was the gold medal game in Lillehammer. By far. Never been involved or seen a game like that in my life.
From those moments to one that you weren't as involved in personally, but I think makes for a really unique story, Paul, and that is one that many Canadians have etched in their memories. Oh yeah, I was blank, insert place here, when Paul Henderson scored for Team Canada in the 72 Summit Series. Where were you?
I was in Millhaven Penitentiary in the common room watching with 14 guys who were charged with 2 counts of murder from the Kingston Penitentiary riot of April 14th, 1871. And that's where I was when that occurred, And Pat Stapleton always told me that was by far the best story he ever. People always told him where they were, and Pat, who died earlier in the year. What a sad loss, and it happened on the day that his grandson signed his first NHL contract. His grandson is Mark Kastelik, who's in the Ottawa American League team, and the son of Ed Kastelik, who played for London Knights. Yeah, but that's where I was.
What was the mood like in that room?
Oh, electrifying. I mean, those are, they're real people. They were totally involved, and everybody in the country was glued to the TV that day.
Mm-hmm.
And if you weren't, you didn't have a TV.
And you had one in the and you had one in the common room at Millhaven Penn.
Yeah. Oh, that was A wing though.
Oh, of course.
But those guys were very interesting.
It's obvious just by listening to you, Paul, that the connections that you've made, the relationships that you've built, the players and the other people in the game that you've come to know, there's still contact with them all these years later. You mentioned Forsberg just a couple of years ago, Ehlers, correcting you on the 3-3. It was a 4-2. These relationships don't go away quietly at all, do they?
But you see, I've been doing the CHL import draft for a number of teams, and he's a guy that, I recommended to Halifax to pick, he and Timo Meyer, actually, and Timo was a late birth date, so they both got picked 9th overall, so, I mean, there's been lifelong friendships. I've been very fortunate and blessed to have great friends. I mean, starting, back with the Drapers. I mean, they taught me everything I know, so I always tell everybody if I know nothing, it's their fault, not mine. But Chris Draper, they asked me to do a favor for him, at 17 after he played Don Mills Midgets, give him a tryout with the Olympic team, just give him a taste. And the guy goes out there, out of midget, and makes the national team, and then wins 4 Stanley Cups, so, I mean, hey, if their dad didn't push me to give him that tryout, then who knows, It's life. It's mysterious.
As a big Red Wings fan, I went to a game once and I got to go meet the players after anyway. I was in the stands and Chris came walking towards me, or at least what I thought was Chris. It was his father wearing one of his Stanley Cup rings, but holy goodness, did they look alike.
Mike. Yeah. Well, the twin brothers, they were inseparable, and what a sad loss losing Bruce at 28, with a 3 and a 1.5-year-old daughter. I remember being like, they grew up, right 2 blocks from me, and we went to the same grade school, and they were 4 or 5 years older than me, but they were my big brothers, and I remember being on the street corner, 64 Primrose in Ottawa, which was where they moved to, at 16. They moved to Ottawa at 16. And I used to go and spend a couple of weeks with them every summer. And I remember being on the street corner, and Bruce was crying his eyes out, because Murray Balfour had passed away. And Murray was on the $1 million line with Bobby Hullen and Red Hay, Billy Hay. And he was the right winger, and he ended up in Hershey with his cancer and, not anywhere near the player he was. And Bruce said that the last thing he said to him was, "See you in training camp." Well, here it is, middle of August, and Bruce is crying his eyes out because he passed, and the same day, Bruce had gone to a doctor with a cyst on his testicle, and the doctor said, "Don't worry about it, go away." Well, he was rife with cancer himself, and, passed away, probably not very long after, not more than a year after, so life's nuts, and what a player he was. If you look at the records with St. Mike's, he outpointed Keon in Keon's first year in Toronto, So the next year, Keon took off 70 points type of thing, but Bruce was the reason, with Father Bauer beating Rattel and Gilbert out of Guelph. I mean, that was, nobody expected that. Nobody,
We kind of
Back
started
to 60-61.
We started this conversation around St. Mike's and that 60-61 Memorial Cup team. And, I know how many big games and events you've attended in the arenas you've been in. So rather than ask the best, be honest with me, Paul. That's St. Mike's Arena. Come on. It's really not a great arena. We know this, right?
No. But my favorite story about the St. Mike's Arena is when I went to St. Mike's as a grade 9 student and played for St. Mike's, it was an outdoor rink. And it just got covered over, is how it became what it is today. And in 60-61, the rink, I think that was the first year of the rink, and Red Kelly dropped the puck between the 2 captains, and one of the captains was Terry O'Malley. Well, he was the captain of, I can't remember who they were playing. And 50 years later, they had the anniversary, and they had Notre Dame and Wilcox were playing St. Mike's Tier 2 team, and it was the first time they'd ever met. And who drops the puck but Terry O'Malley and Red Kelly?
That's fantastic.
Yeah, that's gospel, And I don't know, that's the first place I saw Wendell Clark play. And then I saw him play at the Kentucky Fried Chicken Cup in Ottawa, Nepean, which is now the Steve Eiserman rink. So, yeah.
The KFC Cup.
Yeah. Wilcox, Saskatchewan, Notre Dame, Paul Gerard was on that team. Drafted him for the Rangers, yep.
Paul, did you have a favorite player? Maybe not the best player, but just a favorite player.
I got so many favorite players.
Yeah.
I could never mention one in particular.
That's fair.
And we should be pointing out that every time that Paul mentions drafting players for the Rangers, he means the New York Rangers.
I forgot.
The big
forgot.
guy.
Yeah.
That's right, Paul.
But we used to own Kitchener Rangers. We sold them for $1.
That's right.
Also true. Eugene George got himself a steal with that one, I think.
Yeah.
Paul, this has been a lot of fun. We really appreciate you making the time for us.
No. I've enjoyed it immensely, and I hope to meet you guys someday.
Yeah, let's have a coffee in the media room, okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. I look forward to it.
Next time you're in there, you make sure you slap our heads as you walk by.
All right. Mike Farwell, Chris Pope.
Thanks, Paul. Much appreciated.
All
buddy.
right. Talk to you.
Take care.
Tell Shannon to get on this podcast.
Yeah, I will. Yeah. Don't worry. Yeah, I'll give it to him.
Good.
And tell you the Gretzky story. I can't tell you it. He's going to tell you it.
Okay, exactly. This is going to happen now.
I worked for Gretzky for 3 years with Phoenix, and it was fun. I think the best one about that was if you're running out of time, just let me know. But Wayne flexed his muscles with Marty McSorley in the '93 playoffs in Montreal, and Marty wasn't doing what Wayne wanted him to do. So Wayne said, "But I do have 2,000 points in this league." He was pissed at Marty, and Marty made the comment, "But how many have you had from the D?" Like, in other words, you don't know what you're talking about, buddy. I'll never forget that one. Hey, but how many have you got from D?
That's the competitive spirit in guys like that at that level, for sure.
That's pretty good.
It is. Paul, thank you again for this.
All right. Good to talk to both of you. Bye now.
You too. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye now.